Welcome to the Business Women Australia podcast show, the podcast that brings together industry leaders to discuss the latest trends, insights and strategies. So sit back and relax, let's get inspired by the amazing women who are shaping the future of professional women in Australia. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
So welcome to today's episode of the Business Women Australia podcast show. I'm Lyn Hawkins, National Director of Business Women Australia, and I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we're streaming live today, and pay respects to our elders, past, present, and those emerging, especially this week. It's Reconciliation Week. Really got my ear close to conversations with my colleagues, Aboriginal colleagues in business around the nation, and very keen to hear what reconciliation looks from their perspective going forward, and really is sitting a lot in the truth-telling and treaty piece. So please take your time, particularly this week, to tap into the opportunities to learn and grow your knowledge and support Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So artificial intelligence is now everywhere. I'm always surprised if I hear of someone not using some sort of form of AI now. It seems to be very much in strategic planning, in the boardrooms, in operations, definitely been in our customer service piece for a while now, and it's coming into decision-making scenarios. And for years now, ASI has come with the promise around productivity and efficiency, but many organisations are now discovering that while AI can certainly accelerate work and shorten some timeframes around things, it's also creating new workplace dynamics, some more implementation challenges, some cultural impacts, and important ethical questions alongside extraordinary opportunities. So what does productivity really mean in the age of AI, and what's the impact of all this? And as leaders, what should we be thinking about when it comes to the adoption or not of AI? So in this episode, I'm joined by the fabulous Marion Burchell, who's been one of our very popular guests on the BWA podcast show. She's one of Australia's most respected leaders in government reform, technology innovation and digital transformation. And together we'll explore the evolving relationship between AI, productivity, leadership, organisational culture and human work. Marion, welcome back to the Business Women Australia podcast show.
Thanks, Lyn. Thanks for having me. It's always very exciting to be here with you, and I know we always have a great conversation about these very deep topics, and I'm very excited about today's one.
I certainly am, and thanks for sort of giving us some ideas around how to shape this. So it really is important. It's an important piece of information that everyone across government and commerce need to be really thinking about. So from where you sit with all the work, we're doing some great projects across government and industry, and I'm interested to hear how central is AI now to conversations about productivity, transformation and reform.
Yeah, and Lyn, as you rightly said in the introduction, AI is very topical at the moment. Everyone's talking about it. Everyone's trying to figure out the best way to use it in order to drive greater value for the business and certainly drive greater productivity as a result of that. And what's interesting about that is I think that it's often framed around productivity. And we know from many of the reports, such as the Productivity Commission report, which states that Australia does actually need to be thinking about its productivity game because it hasn't been for some time. And this is resulting in some significant challenges, not just nationally, but also for business as well, for government and for industries. And so Certainly AI has been marketed, shall we say, to many organisations and businesses as being that tool, that technology that will generate greater productivity. And some of that is true. Some of it, though, is a bit of marketing hype as well. And there are a bunch of assumptions around that, around whether we have the capability in order to be able to convert what the promise is into reality. You talked a bit about culture, about leadership before, and some of that certainly does reside in that realm. We also know that some of those assumptions are also around whether we are clear about where AI will generate greater productivity and how we might use that. And the strategic approach, we've certainly seen a lot of organisations use this spaghetti bowl approach, where they throw it on the wall and see what sticks. And yes, you could do that. That is a strategy, but it's not a great strategy because you're chewing up a lot of goodwill, a lot of resources, a lot of energy for not necessarily a lot of gain. And I think the other thing that organisations are talking about at the moment is really around what do we use it for? So there are different forms of AI, and I think this is one of the key things to unpack is when we talk about AI, we kind of bolt all things AI together, and yet there are very different forms of AI, some of which have been part of our world for a long period of time. And so one of the frameworks that I love when we talk about AI is essentially looking at, is it something that is of a narrow view or a broad view? Is it something that is keeping the human in the loop or human out of the loop? And if we think about this, we have things like assisted intelligence. So they're things like your chat GPTs, which we use alongside humans. AI-aided diagnostic imaging and radiology is another one. So they're quite specific in terms of use. And this is something that's been going for some time and is generally the popular way in which we interact with AI. And we're seeing that a lot in organisations where people are using Claude or Chat GPT or Gemini to ask questions in their work. We've got, augmented intelligence, and this is where we start getting into building our AI agents. So we're certainly seeing that as a trend at the moment, people using AI agents. It's also things around processes that we might look at as well to generate particular things like driver assistance systems, in our cars. So these are things, again, that have been part of our lives and every day. But if we look at human out of the loop and a narrow view, this is where we start getting into things like automated license plate recognition systems. So that's another example of something in our everyday life. But this is where people start to struggle a little bit around things like, well, can we do automated dispatch? And we're seeing some examples of that in organisations. And then, of course, if we move into autonomous intelligence, an example of this is where we might get high-speed parcel processing and distribution. So Australia Post is a great example of this. But this is where we get autonomous haulage systems or self-optimising processing plants. Another great tangible example of this is autonomous vehicles. And so where we start seeing human out of the loop is, I think, where we're seeing companies and organisations kind of struggle a little bit because it's an emerging practice as well. And so it's a really interesting time. There are lots of conversations around how do we use AI, how do we use it to drive greater productivity, greater efficiencies. And certainly I think that might be the starting point for us as humans and as the technology evolves, because sometimes, the marketing hype doesn't live up to the reality of what it can actually do, which does cause some tension. But I do think that it is part of enabling the next wave of productivity growth across lots of industries. But I think it's not just about a productivity tool. if we think about it just as a productivity tool or as an efficiency tool, then we're missing the greater play here, which is around using AI as a way to really redesign and recreate what work is, and recreate not just work, but also organisations and business models. And it's not going to go away soon. It's definitely going to become more embedded in our everyday lives. It already is, as you said. And so it's really, I think, looking at how do we actually do that so that organisations maintain their longevity, their sustainability, their profitability, as opposed to going by the wayside of blockbuster and so on.
Yes, so if we circle back and just sort of think about, well, how do we define productivity in the AI era? And, you know, I'd really love to hear what you think about what we mean by that, and what could be potentially missing from that conversation. You know, you're hinting at the fact this is a potential opportunity to really sit back and look at what our purpose of work is.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me take the productivity part of your question first. And if I forget about the purpose part of your question, then please remind me. But absolutely, if we're talking about productivity, it's really important for us to define, well, what are we actually talking about here? Because a lot of times these words get bandied around and we have an idea, perhaps, of what we think it is. But if we think productivity is the measure of how efficiently a business converts its resources, such as time and labour and technology, into valuable outputs, I think that's a really good place to start. And valuable outputs will depend on what industry you're in as to what that is. So it could be around profit. If you're in the public sector, it will be around public value, and there are ways to calculate that. In the not-for-profit sector, again, it might be value for every donation, you know, that's given. So there may be particular metrics around what that is depending on the industry or sector you're in. The issue, though, is that we're really operating in terms of pre-AI structures, shall we say, and we haven't updated our operating systems, be that our mental modes, be that the policies, the structures, the strategies, the capabilities, the systems that we have in organisations that all work together as systems to form an organisation. So we're all essentially working on old hardware, if you like. And so there's this view that working harder or getting better results with the same or fewer resources is ultimately what we're talking about in terms of productivity. And I would say that, yeah, sure, if we were back in the 1970s where we were in a position of a growing economy with a level of stability and certainty, absolutely, but our world has changed. And we're all living through history at the moment and have been for some time, where there's increased levels of uncertainty, higher complexity. The accelerated rate of change and information is crazy. I saw a fact the other day that we've essentially gone from a Model T Ford to a hybrid in 3 years when it comes to technology. And yet that took 89 years for it to actually happen. And so productivity, I think, is now really thinking about how do we actually reimagine how we use technology to drive greater value for our customer, our shareholders, our stakeholders, whoever they may be. And so what does this actually look like in a tangible and practical way, I hear you say, Lyn? And so an example of this may be, a low productivity example, maybe we've always done it this way. This is how we've always done it. It's not broke. Let's not fix it. And that could be something like a team spending hours each day manually copying and pasting numbers from a spreadsheet into an email to send to a manager, or even just sending the spreadsheet to a manager. A high productivity example is where that same team sets up an automated dashboard with updates in real time. And that allows time to be saved, allowing employees to focus on solving those real problems or talking even directly to a customer, and potentially generating greater growth for a business as well. And so we can see there that they're still doing the output, getting the outcome, but in the higher productivity example, they're doing it faster. So time is definitely one of these critical factors. You're leveraging probably the technology you already have invested in as an organisation and getting greater value out of it. And your team actually has greater time. So we've got this weird thing that if we're busy, then we're being productive. And I usually call BS on that, because busyness doesn't actually mean you're having impact or driving value or being productive. It just means you're being busy. And I would question why you're being busy and if there's actually a better way in terms of reducing the busyness and the noise in order to actually have greater impact and value. And then I guess that gets me to the second part of your question, which you might need to remind me about, Lyn.
The purpose, what is our purpose of work?
Yes.
I mean, I think this is the opportunity that and I know we were chatting before we started the show about sort of thinking back at the Industrial Revolution and how that was really giving everyone hope that by not having to work in these, very heavily manual environments, even they were even child labour environments, that through Industrial Revolution we were going to be having all this time made available. The same thing happened within the home with all these, washing machines and dishwashers and all these things that was going to be able to give the opportunity for more time for families to connect. I can't have a conversation without thinking that, okay, if productivity and efficiencies can impact on, better value, understanding our customer needs, our stakeholders, but what about the big questions about why we work and how we are as humans on this planet?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think there's a number of schools of thought on this one. There's the school of thought of we're going to reach the utopia, universal income, all turn into Renaissance people where we have all this spare time and, we can learn all the things that we want to and read all the things we want to. And that's an interesting utopia, but I feel like if I'm going to be very pragmatic and think about humans and human behaviour and the past, particularly around your examples of the Industrial Revolution, I feel like we tend to fill that time with other things. And so I think there's a real great opportunity here around, if we're going to use technology for good and really step into our higher forms of as humans, and say, well, what is our purpose as an organisation? What is my purpose as a human for being here? And how does that link to work and generating greater impact? Technology definitely allows us to do that. However, what we're finding is people are so busy at the moment. We're being fed so much information at the rate of knots. We're juggling with this increased complexity and challenges, and we are generally just trying to put out one fire from another, that we're not actually creating the time and space to actually be having these concerted strategic conversations. And yet I think that is the most important thing for leaders to do, is to actually pause, breathe, and create time and space to be thinking about this, because we have an opportunity to create the work that we want to be doing, reimagine what that is, realign that with purpose and values, and also have a greater value and impact on the bigger world as well. And our younger generation is certainly wanting and craving this. I think this is going to be the differentiator for future employers, is that employees are looking for workplaces that allows them to have that greater good and positive good impact, and has their values aligned with the business values. So I think this is going to be really important, and AI allows us to be able to create the time and space for that if we're strategic, and I think this is the key, if we're strategic about how we think about it and how we use it, and therefore how we allow people to use the time that's given back to them without creating greater busyness. Because I think that's really important. Like, we all talk about getting rid of lower value work, thinking about higher value impact things. But I think that there's also a need for creating time for people to be able to do the thinking and the planning, which I'm not seeing at the moment, which is causing chaos in organisations. And that's really, I think, going to be the differentiator.
Yeah, that chaos is really showing up in the conversations that we're having in our roundtables, in our quiet forums. Women are great community sensors inside organisations, really tuned into, great empathy facilitators. And I'm hearing a lot around a focus on cost reduction and workload optimisation strategies for AI, but without the time to really reflect on going back to a whole way of why we do what we do and what we stand for as an organisation, as the leaders inside the organisation. And this is an interesting dilemma that we're in. And if, I know from my perspective, if I aren't the one to stop and have a pause at the beginning of a meeting and do a grounding exercise, the presence in the room is not there. Everyone's focused on, this is, why am I here? This is so busy. I've got this happening. And really not actually saying, hey, I've got, I've got a whole bunch of stuff, and I'm actually really taking time out in this meeting, and I don't want to be here. I want to be somewhere else. I want to be doing something else. So if you don't do the grounding and bring everyone into the room, create that third space. I'm thinking about that seminal work around the third space. It's so important as leaders to create, so that we step back and think about why we're adopting AI and what does it mean for us. So one of the things that, if we come back to this leadership piece and human impact, you've spoken a lot about that intersection between AI leadership and humanity. The HR functions are really starting to get called into the boardrooms. We had Andrea Durant speak in Melbourne recently, and she said boards have predominantly been requesting, historically, finance, legal, those kind of strategy type functions, technical functions. She said now we're calling out for diversity. We want comms. We want human resources experts. We want people to, that are going to be helping us actually reshape as a board what we should be thinking about, so that can translate then into the CEOs. Now Andrea, like you, is very optimistic. I'd love to see that happen in our publicly listed boards, because I believe that we often think about our shareholders more around what they might need from a profitability point of view, but so many shareholders are looking for what is our purpose and how are we going to be good citizens. So let's talk about that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that human aspect, because it really is the differentiator, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think and this goes back to that operating system, our mental modes and our systems within organisations. We have had many conversations with organisations, public as well as private, ASX listed, multinationals, about this exact issue. And many of them are struggling with this tension around we need to drive greater productivity, we need to increase our profit margins, we see an opportunity to optimise resources and to create greater efficiencies, but we're not necessarily seeing this translate into our people. And it's because they're not taking a human approach to this. They're taking a very, very sterile approach, which we would normally do for, say, a project. Where we create we need funding to do this particular initiative. We get the funding. We, as a project team, understand, why it's important, and then we just try and roll it out within the time frame and budget. But this is very different because of the conversations that are happening in the social media space, in other spaces where, as humans, we love a level of certainty and control, but we're in this evolution, shall we say, and transitionary period, just like the Industrial Revolution that you talked about before. And so some people are optimistic and they see the opportunity, but other people are operating from a point of view of fear. And if we're just looking at it from a point of view of project management, then we're missing the human in the system. And we know from all change management literature that if we don't consider the people aspect, then this is going to fail because we're coming up against significant resisting forces in the organisation. And this is a lot more challenging than just change management associated with a project, because we're essentially, like I said, doing an evolution here. And so I love the conversations that are happening around the table, where the conversation is we need to have HR and technology in the room. AI is not a technology. This is really interesting. They're like, AI is not a technology, it's actually a capability. And so the mindset has just shifted from this technology enabler that drives efficiencies and cost reduction to actually its capability. And just like any other human capability, we now need to be thinking about this additional capability within our organisation, what this then means for the workplace, what it means for our people, how do we skill them up, and how do we actually evolve our people with their skill set with the evolution of AI, because AI is still evolving itself, so that we can then see opportunities and drive the best value out of this technology. And noting that it's going to completely, as I said earlier, the trick here where we see greater value and impact is thinking about it not as just generating productivity and efficiencies and optimization, but actually recreating how we work and our business models. And so what am I actually talking about here? In many instances, these practices within an organisation are essentially going, how do we then reimagine and recreate our human resource systems, noting this AI as a capability, and we're going to have human and AI collaborations where we need to not turn our people into technology people, but how do they actually generate the best out of the technology, because they're essentially going to be, for want of a better word, a digital staffer working alongside them. And so this isn't then just a case of conversational chat stuff, but this is a case of how do we actually get greater framing? How do we actually get greater prompts? How do we actually get greater interrogation of the information coming back to reduce the bias that's coming through, to reduce the whole, oh, that was such an excellent question and here's the answer. Oh, you're just so awesome, because there's this inbuilt crazy positive reinforcement. How do we flip it so that it can actually interrogate, so that we reduce the amount of AI slop that's coming through? And how do we do it so that our people see the benefit and actually get alongside this, and see it as an opportunity without coming at it from a fear of we're going to lose our jobs. I'm no longer going to be the subject matter expert, and so I'm worried that I'm not going to have the answer. I'm worried that I'm going to fail at this because I haven't learnt anything in the last 10 years or 20 years, because I've just stayed in my lane. So there's a lot of these human emotions that need to be considered when we're actually looking at the workplace redesign. And I think what organisations are seeing now is that going back to that old operating system where we go productivity, efficiency, optimisation, we can cut people out, get rid of FTEs. We're not actually necessarily seeing that at the moment because we're actually seeing it more come up in time. So people might get faster at doing something, or they might also generate higher quality work. And so boards and executive are going, well, how do we actually generate the return on investment if we can't actually cut FTEs? And that's because we're operating from an old way of thinking, as opposed to going, well, we're getting actually better quality work. We're actually people are actually working, their 8 hours a day instead of 10 hours a day, as an example. And so the jobs I don't think are necessarily going to go away either. They're going to shift into something else, a reimagined workforce.
You're painting a really positive potential approach. We're not seeing that in place a lot. Why do you think that organisations are not stepping back and actually looking at it like this? Is it because we've had too many, dare I say it, number crunchers in the room, looking at these as tools for cost reduction, so that, rather than thinking creatively how we increase our profitability and our impact by growing what we're doing and shifting. And it's sort of really interesting because it's very much what Andrea was saying to us. But is this being adopted by the boards and by the chairs and by the senior teams that are running organisations?
I think you're right, Lyn. I think, again, this goes back to that old way of thinking and old way of doing business, is if we're going to be using these technologies, then the old way of measuring it is by cost cutting somewhere. And I don't think that is what we're looking at here. We are essentially looking at, as you rightly said, akin to the Industrial Revolution, but we're looking at a digital revolution. And so this does actually create a whole new world, but we haven't had the time and space to really think about what this actually means. And a lot of people that are in those positions of leadership, or what I would actually probably call more management than leadership, even though we see them as leadership roles, I like to make a distinction between management and leadership, and we're seeing more management as opposed to leadership in this space. And many of them have been promoted based on the past. They've been successful in operating in the past, from optimizing, from cost cutting, from streamlining to generate greater efficiencies. And I'm not saying that that's not worthwhile, because you do have to have good foundations in place in order to then capitalise on AI. And I think that's really important, and I'll come back to that. But I think that there's an opportunity that people are missing because they themselves aren't comfortable with it, or maybe they're not sure what it looks like, because it's still an emerging practice, some of this stuff. It's still being created. And maybe we don't have the diversity of thought that we think we have in those conversations, in the boardroom, in those executive teams, where they're coming with these opportunities to redesign and recreate. Sometimes it is going to be difficult because in large organisations it might be looking at changing the ship, steering the ship a little bit, and that might take a bit of time as well. So there is a bit of time component to this. But I think we just need to evolve our thinking a little bit here around the art of the possible, because if organisations and businesses don't, they will be left behind.
Yeah, absolutely. And you feel, I think, there's, from a management perspective, you're right. There's so much they're dealing with, and I think there's a workforce that has suffered a lot of change fatigue as well in amongst all that. There's feelings of burnout, of having to adopt something new. Not for those who haven't gone into that world yet, it's another thing to learn. Let's go back to that idea of setting those foundations. So, what are the sort of ways that organisations need to be? What are the things that we should be paying attention to? You talked about setting those foundations in place. And making sure that those productivity or efficiency gains that AI may be bringing aren't impacting in a negative way inside an organisation. Perhaps there might be inequities across what's happening, or there might be cultural or systemic risks that they need to be aware of. What would be your advice to our listeners who are in those roles?
Yeah, so I think the first thing would be understanding that the organisation actually operates in different systems. So systems thinking, I think, is key here. And that does need a shift from our siloed thinking in terms of working within our area of the business or what we know. The systems level thinking is going to be so important to this, firstly. Part of that also means understanding that an organisation has multiple systems that actually create the way an organisation works and operates. And some of those things are, you've got your strategy system, you've got your tools and technology system, you've got your human and culture system, and then you've got your process system. And these systems need to be aligned. So there's no point in going, we're going to put AI in, and then we might look at a process and that's it. And then wonder why we get either no traction or minimal traction. It's because we haven't done a systems level thinking. We haven't looked at what are the capabilities needed? What's the leadership role in this? What are the other tools that are here that might need to integrate into this? What is the problem we're actually trying to solve, and is it a scalable problem? Do we have the processes in place and the guidelines in place and the guardrails in place to be able to do this, and the support for our people to be able to do this as well? Just very quickly, I mean, obviously there's more within that. And so I think that systems level thinking is important. With systems level thinking, it also helps to reduce the amount of AI slop as well. So we're certainly seeing, we've been sold that AI is a productivity generating tool. And in some instances, that is the case. There are some great use cases around that. But in a lot of instances, we're seeing a higher level of AI slop be created within organisations. And so what do I mean by that? So AI slop happens when people have an over-reliance on AI, when they assume that the information that comes from AI is correct. They also maybe don't have time to check because, again, we're so busy. Maybe they don't have the capability because they're still building their own knowledge and expertise around that. And so what we're seeing as a result is that these generated AI responses are going up an organisation and can actually get past multiple people before someone actually pauses and goes, that actually, from a sense check point of view, that actually doesn't sound right. And so actually goes back and has to clean it up. So we're seeing a reduction in productivity and a reduction in efficiency and an increase in workload in some cases. And that's because people haven't taken that systems-led view around how do we actually ensure the quality of the output here is good and that it's being used in a way that is impactful, is aligned with our values, is generating greater value, is appropriate, and so on. So there are a few things. Another thing is that tension sometimes in organisations where you have a team that has totally got on board with this, is running away with this because they're so excited, they see the value, they're creating amazing things. For instance, I ran a workshop recently, and within a 2-hour design workshop, we had a vibe-coded complete data dashboard prototype of a very complex system with data sets and so on, and everyone's mind was completely blown, and it's like, well, it is possible, and now you need to go and test the validity and quality and whether it's feasible within the environment and context it needs to work in, but it is possible. But then on the other hand, you've got people that are the laggards that maybe they've tried AI but didn't get the value from it because they weren't supported, the policies weren't in place, there were no guardrails, maybe there was no training or whatever, and they've gone, well, that didn't work, I don't see the value in that. And now you've created greater resistance for when, as an organisation, you're actually quite clear, have that clarity on how you want to use it, where you want to use it, and so on. And so this causes cultural tension between teams as well. And so we're seeing a lot of greater challenges and complexity within organisations than what we have previously at different levels and across different systems.
There's so much in that I want to delve into. I just love it. I'm looking at the clock. This is us. I mean, and look, I'm seeing it's really interesting. We're really focusing on conscious leadership, and being intentional in Business Women Australia. It's going to be really sort of shifting our organisation from being about networking to being around developing leaders, as conscious leaders. And we've got one of our members who's right into AI, like developed their whole AI kind of strategy, and just said to me something really strange. My AI agent said, I can't promote myself as a conscious leader because that's not going to get me the kind of doors open in corporate that I'm looking for. And I was like, whoa, this is fascinating. That AI would suggest that anyone as a conscious leader couldn't use that title for themselves, to hang their hat on that. So it made me question one thing was, how are we defining conscious leadership? From my point of view, it's about that self-awareness piece and aligning with the inner development goals attached to the UN sustainability goals, which we really are adopting, mapping all our work against. With the guidance of Wendy Harper and the advisory board, it's been just great being able to look at what we're doing around that piece of self-development and then taking responsibility and consciously listening and bringing others on the journey as a leader. And that's our definition of conscious leadership. But there's some definition out there that the AI is picking up that's, causing a red flag, which is causing that tension. But the great thing about it is I love it because it's a tension around a conversation that needs to be had deeper. And it's like, well, okay, let's really unpack that. Where could conscious leadership be a problem? What we don't want is we don't want like-minded thinkers. We want diversity. We want let's look at it. What does it mean from us? But something like that, if we hadn't had a safe space for someone to bring that up and question, why and share that their AI is suggesting it's not something for them, then we would never have known. We would never have known or had the deeper conversation around it. So look, if we can wrap up, give us some advice as managers in executive roles. as leaders who are taking the time out to sort of think philosophically and ethically around what the value of all this is, what would you say are the most important questions that we need to be asking before rolling out? Oh, look, let's say, look, we're already rolling out stuff. So what are the sorts of questions we should be asking right now, and the discussions we should be having? Marion?
Yeah, so there's a few things there. And before I talk about that, and maybe I can tie this in. So I think, are we building the right capabilities within our organisation, I think is a really good question. Across the whole organisation, from leadership to middle management to our people coming through. And they're going to be very different, because our people coming through are not going to have the level of skills and experience that people further up the organisational culture have. And if we're using AI as a way to essentially be like an intern or a junior staff member, then how are those junior people actually going to learn on the job? And then how are they actually going to be able to quality control and know something is actually wrong with their work? So what does that look like from our human capability and training point of view? And then in terms of middle management, I think it's around how do we lead teams through this digital evolution, particularly when I'm not a technical or digital leader myself. And I might feel very uncomfortable with that because, I might be an engineer or a scientist or a finance person or whatever. So I think that that's also really important too. And then from, that leadership point of view, how do we actually get focused around the strategic play here, strategic use of AI to generate greater value, to get that alignment of our purpose and to have impact? And are our measures right at the moment in terms of what we're measuring? Because I would suggest to you that most organisations are measuring the wrong thing. And so there's that. The other thing I think that's really important is also from a capability and people point of view is that AI is going to further compound our human foibles if we haven't actually got the leadership capability and training right. So what do I mean by that? So in building my own AI agents, I had this aha moment, because I'm obviously training these AI agents in the same way you would spend time training a junior staff member or an intern. So, you have to build their knowledge, their expertise, their understanding of the brand, the tone, and, what output quality you're looking for, what resources, where to go for things, all that sort of stuff. And yet what we find in organisations is that leaders are generally very busy, or they might get frustrated by someone new and go, oh, I'll just do it myself because it's easier to do and it's going to take less time. And so this is going to compound if we actually haven't built our own leadership capabilities and skills when it comes to this digital age. Now, having said that, that's also the same if we're doing a systems approach with our processes as well. So technology is just an enabler. And so if our processes aren't right, if we haven't done the work to optimise how we're doing our work, thought about, are we doing the right things? Have we removed the waste in the system? Is there a better way? Can we reimagine this for how technology might help us to drive greater productivity? Then what's going to happen is when we put AI over the top, it's actually just going to magnify the crap and inefficiencies that's already in our processes and system. And so we want to make sure we've got those foundations right. And it's interesting because we're doing some work at the moment with some regulators, and they're like, well, surely people can just AI what they need to do. And when you actually do it, it comes up with old information, outdated information, incorrect information because it can't pick up nuancing and context. So if your organisation or business is going to rely on customers using AI to do something, to act or to come to you, then I'd suggest asking the question of, is our information out there the information that is appropriate, that matches what it is we want people to know and do? And if not, clean it up. Then from a strategic point of view, I think it's around that strategic governance. So where are we going to use AI? What's the best use cases if we're talking about the different types of AI? Being mindful about those different types of AI, because they all require very different leadership, management and governance approaches for them. And retaining that human in the loop, I think, is also really important. Not abdicating accountability is really important here. So having clear leadership. So who's responsible? I tell you, it's not the technology team. So what we tend to find is people go technology, digital or technology. It's like, no, this is always business-led, technology-enabled. And so what's the operational transparency here? Do we have the right guidelines in place? Are our risk and quality control in place? Because sometimes this has got to be messy, particularly if we're doing emerging practice. Things might get messy. So how do we actually deal with this from a risk and control point of view without necessarily putting a lid on everything either, but looking at where those opportunities are? And then, of course, from a tools and technology point of view, do we have the right tools and technology in place? Do we have the right guardrails in place? Do we have the right capabilities there as well to enable our people? So I think that there's a lot there for leaders, and there's so much more we can talk about, but there's probably a good starting point.
I love it. And look, you know, I've always said you're very optimistic. You've got great belief in humanity. And I'd love you to share with our listeners a little bit about, you know, you were telling me about the Pope's recent buy-in to this conversation and your thoughts about where this could go. I really think it's fascinating that you've got the Vatican with an opinion about this. So
yeah, it's very unusual. Yeah, it is very unusual.
And it was just not, it's not right. But it's just too late. Like, it's too late to even have a comment like that. Surely.
Yeah. So for those watching, I was saying to Lyn before we started that the Pope made an announcement, and it's very unusual for the Vatican to weigh in on these things, which essentially said that they thought AI was they're not supporting it, essentially, for a number of reasons. And to paraphrase, one of those reasons is that there is this inherent bias in how the AI is built, which that bias then is not for the greater good of humanity. There's a view that instead of AI being essentially a universal thing for the greater good of humanity, that it's being locked up by tech oligarchs, which then increases the power base to those tech oligarchs. And there was also this view of the broader impact that AI is having, not just on humans, but on our environment as well. So Lyn, you were talking about the environmental harm that some of these data centres that AI requires, is significant. So it's a really interesting one. However, as you rightly say, the horse is bolted on this. And so I don't think we can bring it back. But I do think that it does create some really significant opportunities, because I think as humans, we're very adaptive. And so the real question is, are we going to adapt for using AI for a greater good in a conscious way in terms of the future we want to create for future generations, and considering the fact that we can do this with a view of solving some of the world's complex long-term challenges, such as environmental sustainability, unlocks some potential really great new industries as well, because the technology exists in terms of reducing the environmental impact that data centres have. It's just we need to link that with the people that are actually building these data centres and do it in a way that's cost effective. And as opposed to, I think, being walking zombies that are unconsciously letting these things happen to us. And so there's a real conscious choice that we need to make around this. And that does require leaders at all levels within organisations, whatever that organisation or industry is, to be having those conscious discussions and making those conscious choices as well.
I love listening to you, Marion Burchell. I really.
Well, at least one person does.
Look, there's so much intellect and experience, but a wonderful view of the world that gives me hope. I'm just imagining as you were speaking, little tiny data centers that don't require as much water. I was thinking about the old phones that we used to carry around, these big heavy that just didn't do much, and the big huge mainframes and the printers. Data centers will become micro centers, and it gives me hope. Being a mother of four very socially conscious children is really sobering for me, and we have incredible conversations that really unpack a lot of what's happening from their perspective and what they're feeling like they're inheriting. And I really have great belief that humanity, especially now, given the opportunity, we don't have to be so busy doing things that AI can be actually doing as a digital co-worker, gives us time to really sit back and think about what our purpose is, and give the Pope some hope in humanity that, we actually are really, at the end of the day, there's more good in the world and more love in the world than ever, even though the loud voices and the discomfort and the wars and the greed is loudly being promoted across media. My experience is that the majority of people are good and want to do good and want to help each other out. And with that, let's just close with some sort of wonderful view that, given an opportunity, giving permission to ourselves to sit back and think about how we want to use this and what kind of world we want to be in, this is the opportunity that's sitting right in the boardroom. So please take the time out to think about what our purpose is in life and in business and in community.
It's the opportunity of a lifetime, and it's the opportunity of intergenerations. So it's very important work that we need to do.
It is. Thank you, Marion Burchell, for being on the show. We're going to get you back. I never let you off the hook. Listeners, if you have enjoyed this episode, please share it with your colleagues and networks. Share it as a way of starting a conversation as a group. Let it be something that sort of ignites what it means to you. What is all this bringing up for you around the table? Give the time for those voices who might be sitting back thinking the opportunity to express their thoughts as well. This is the time for those. If you're loud and usually the one driving, sit back and be curious and listen. If you're one of those ones that's deeply thinking about things, maybe this is your time to step up and share your thoughts. Please join us for future conversations. We've got roundtables online. We've got in-person events at capital cities. These are the sorts of things that we love to sit together. Right now, as we're speaking, we've got an ESG roundtable happening in Western Sydney that's being hosted by BDO. Look, there's stuff going on everywhere, in every room, and bring these conversations into your organisations and into your teams so that everyone has the chance to help shape the future. Thanks, Marion, and we'll have you back on the show another time.
Thank you, Lyn. Thanks, everyone.
And we'll We'll see if I can. Oop! I've just lost my screen, but that's okay. I will end this show in a minute when I can log back on. I've gone onto my stream site. See ya. Don't talk to me about tech.
Surely there's an AI for that, Lyn.
Oh my God, surely there is. I need an AI agent on.
You have been listening to the Business Women Australia podcast show. We hope you've enjoyed today's episode and gained some valuable insights to empower you on your journey. Don't forget to comment, like and subscribe to stay updated in our latest episodes. And if you're not already a member of Business Women Australia, what are you waiting for? Head to our website today and join so that you can connect with a thriving community of inspiring women across Australia. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.